I always told you, bodybuilders don't retire, they just take breaks. I created Species Nutrition with one mission in mind: to provide bodybuilders and serious athletes with no-nonsense supplements that work. I put my name and reputation on every bottle of Species Nutrition products. If you want to be your absolute best, join the evolution. Dave Palumbo here with an RX Muscle news update. I'm sure you guys have heard it by now. If not, Cbum, Chris Bumstead, has decided to throw his hat into an open bodybuilding show in the men's open division. He is committed to doing the Prague Pro that's coming up in a few weeks. And a lot of people were surprised by the announcement because Chris officially retired from competition at the Mr. Olympia that just passed after winning 6 titles in the Classic Physique division. But I guess in his back of his head, he always had the desire to do this open division show. He wanted to see how he can fare against it. Our very own Sid Faruqi was in Dubai this past weekend. He was interviewing Hani Rambat up on the main stage. And when he asked Hani about the potential of Chris Bumstead ever competing in the open division, Hani said, well, you're going to have to wait for Chris to make an announcement, which kind of like tipped us off a little bit, like, well, maybe there is something in the planning stages, because I would think if Chris Bumstead was officially retired, Hani would have probably just said as his coach, he's done, he's done. So I think this was his plan all along. I guess he figured after the Olympia, he'd have a good 5 or 6 weeks, put on 5 or 6 pounds, come into the Prague Pro show, 5 or 6 pounds bigger than he was at the Olympia. I'm sure that's probably the plan at this point. I'm sure he's training really hard over these next couple of weeks to do that. He's in contest shape already, so it's not like the guy has to really train or lose too much more fat. I'm sure even if he rebounds a little bit, he probably can come down the last couple pounds and get those glutes and hamstrings in shape like they were for the Olympia. The question is, how will Chris Bumstead do in the open class? Now, as we know, you only can do as well as who shows up, right? So, I mean, if Chris did a show, in April, one of the early shows, but we usually don't see a lot of competitors, show up, I'm sure he could win a pro show if he picked the right show. The question is, these shows post-Olympia that are occurring in Europe, the ones we call the European Grand Prix Tour, we used to call that, we have Romania, we have Prague. The question is, how many people from the Olympia are going to show up at this show? Now, we know that Martin Fitzwater has committed to doing the Prague Pro. Martin finished 4th at the Olympia. This is a guy who has surged in the last 2 years more than any bodybuilder I've seen. In my mind, he beat Nick Walker in New York at the New York Pro, even though Nick wound up getting the victory there. And obviously, finishing 4th at the Olympia, the guy just keeps improving and getting better and better and better. So the question is, how does Bumstead stack up against Martin Fitzwater? Well, let's look at pose for pose. Chris has got a very big structure, so he's going to look impressive. He's taller than Martin, which will be impressive on stage. He's got a tinier waist than Martin, which is going to be impressive on stage. And he's got phenomenal legs. So, I mean, Martin's got phenomenal legs too, but when you compare Cbum's legs to Martin's legs are a lot bigger. Now, you might say, well, I like Chris Bumstead's legs better. I like his glutes and hamstrings better. And you might be right there, because Chris has some incredible legs. But when you start comparing upper bodies, Chris doesn't have the best arms. Martin's arms are really impressive. But I think where Chris really lacks enough size to stand with these open guys is in the back department. He has kind of a shallow back. He's got a really nice tiny waist. And when he hits the double bicep, he has a nice taper and he has a lot of good detail in there, but he doesn't really have the density, girth, and width of an open competitor. If he had that, he probably would never make weight. So, because he has very big legs. The reason why Chris can make weight is because he doesn't have a lot of mass in his back, but everything flows so nicely that it doesn't really matter. I mean, Mike Sommerfeld beat Chris Bumstead in a bodybuilding competition at the Olympia, if you ask my opinion. The problem was he wasn't competing against him in bodybuilding, he was competing against him in classic physique. And so from a classic physique standpoint, Chris had more wow and more of a classic look. His poses were more classic than Mike's, and that's why Chris won that show. But Mike Sommerfeld is a better bodybuilder than Chris Bumstead. He's got a better back. He has a teeny tiny waist too, just like Chris. He's got way better legs than Chris does, which is hard because Chris has got good legs, you know. So from a bodybuilding standpoint, Mike beats Chris, but Chris, once again, wins because it's classic physique. Now Chris is going into a bodybuilding realm where he's got to compete against bodybuilders who have bigger legs than him, who have bigger backs than him, who has the waist line that's very comparable to his. I think he's going to have a lot of trouble, winning that show. Only because you're going to have guys like Martin, and I don't know who else is doing it. We don't really have a full list yet, but I'm sure there'll be some quality guys in Prague to try to requalify for next year's Olympia. Does Chris think he's going to win this show? I don't think so. I don't think that Chris is going into the show saying, I have to win this show. Chris is going into the show, number one, for his fans, because the fans want to see it at least one more time, right? Because if Chris retires and he's done, everyone wants to know how could he have done if he would have done an open show. So I think Chris wants to see himself how he could do against these open guys. I truly do believe that if Chris trained for the open division and took a year off and put on the size he needed, I think he could be crazy dominant and he could win pro shows and wind up on the Olympia stage and even probably be a top 5 Olympian. He's just not there. Obviously, his goal, he really couldn't put on too much size because he never would have made weight. So we're kind of putting a guy who doesn't belong into this division in the division and then seeing how he does. It's, some people would say, well, Sean Clarita went from 212 to the open and look how great he did. He won pro shows. Yeah, but Sean Clarita was a bodybuilder. He was a shorter bodybuilder, but he was a bodybuilder. He had a complete bodybuilder physique. Chris Bumstead is a classic physique guy and has all the wows and bells and whistles that a classic physique guy needs. It's not going to translate over into the open division as easily as people may think. But I think that Chris will look impressive. I think that he will not look out of place there. He might just look a little smaller than some of these other guys, which is weird because he's so much taller than everyone, right? And he's wider than everyone. I think he's just going to be lacking. He's going to look like he's lacking in certain body parts, whereas these other bodybuilders look like more complete. But he will hold his own because he will absolutely exploit his gifts, which are tiny waist, vacuum pose, impressive side poses, side chest, side tricep. Definitely hold his own there. He's got a great side leg. He's got everything you want to see. He could definitely win the side poses in a lot of these against most of these guys. Where he's going to find he has trouble is back double bicep pose, back lat spread. That's going to be his weaknesses. But because he can win so many poses, ab thigh is a great pose for him, I think that he might do better than people think. I just don't see him beating Martin Fitzwater. And, no one, as a fan, you want to see Chris Bumstead go in and win an open show and then retire and say, hey, I qualified for the Olympia in both divisions, and I have nothing to prove now. I'm done. And now we're hearing from Chris that, well, if he wins the Prague Pro show, that he would consider, although a lot of people are saying he's saying that he definitely would do it, but he said he would consider doing the Open Mr. Olympia in 2025. So now he went from, I'm retiring, I want to spend time with my family, I have nothing else to prove, to now he's like doing the Open in Prague because, well, I'm in shape already. Now he's saying, well, if I win Prague and I qualify for the Olympia, maybe I'll compete. That means it's another whole year of competition. So what I'm reading from this is that he kind of is over the classic division. He has nothing left to prove. He won 6 Olympias. He's the best of all time. He's the GOAT. He's got, 25 million followers on Instagram. He's one of the most popular people in the entire industry. And maybe he got bored. And so this is something new. Maybe he would consider, doing the Olympia, but then it kind of sucks him back into the whole competition thing. And then he's going to want to put size on so he can compete with these guys because he's very competitive. Obviously, he has a lot of fans. They want to see him. How good can he be in the open division? It might not be a one-time thing. So I don't know if he's teasing us like a Kai Green tease just to get us kind of questioning, well, what would happen if Chris did open? Or he's just, legitimately saying, well, if I do well, I'd like to see how far I can go in this. I always told you, bodybuilders don't retire. They just take breaks. They always wind up coming back somehow. Anyway, the show should be great in Prague. We have guys committing like Amir Omaragic, Horse MD. You never know who else. Maybe we'll see Samson Dowder in that show. Wouldn't that be great? That might be a little preview for what if Chris did the Olympia? There you go. Will it happen? That remains to be seen. I don't know. Like I said, I don't think he could beat Martin Fitzwater. But if he beats some other guys that are in the open division that are doing well and maybe winning a couple pro shows, that's certainly a feather in his cap. So the excitement level of what's going to happen in a few weeks is off the charts. And I think that it's going to really, really make the bodybuilding division that much more exciting. It gives us as press guys something to talk about for the rest of the year, because there really isn't that much. Really, those shows, the Prague show, the Romania show, are kind of like, well, they're just guys trying to requalify for next year. Yeah, we'll break them down, but they're not that exciting. Now we have a level of excitement, that's going to raise it up to a much, much higher level. Plus, we still have the NPC Nationals at the end of the year. So a lot of bodybuilding still to go before this 2024 season is over. Chris Bumstead adding that layer of excitement, and I think that, hey, that's what it's all about. I mean, I thought the Olympia was going to be the pinnacle of pro shows this year. Now it looks like we're going to get another, like a second Olympia. We're going to have our Classic Physique Olympia champ going against some of the best guys in the open division. So it's going to be exciting, and I'm sure we'll handicap it. We'll do some iron debates on it over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully Chris posts updates to keep us all excited about what he's doing. I hear he's training with Martin Fitzwater, so that's even a better story right there. And I think that it's any publicity like this is good for the sport. So I'm excited. We'll find out what's going to happen in the coming weeks. Dave Palumbo with an RX Muscle News Update.